with Jerusalem stone and many other beautiful features, nice imposing edifice. And outside there's a crew working on a sukkah, a little wooden booth that they build outside for the holiday of Sukkot, which will be next month. And they're building, and somebody comes by and wants to know what's going on. So they say, we're building the sukkah. This is going to be for the holiday of Sukkot. It's an 8-day holiday. We use the sukkah. And the fellow can't understand. You're building all of this just for 8 days? Two of the crew says, what do you mean? You see that beautiful building over there? The synagogue? They built all of that just for 3 days. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And of course, it's a bit of a sad joke, which references how too many Jews only show up at the synagogue for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But that does mean that these are very special days. Days when even someone who may not be showing up all year, may not feel the connection all year, feels connected and wants to celebrate these days properly. So we're going to try to understand what's so special about these days, what makes them so high that they're called the high holidays. And when we understand that background and that meaning, we'll understand how to make them into higher holidays and do them right and do them better. So we're going to do this for the next 3 weeks, starting tonight and another 2 Mondays, looking at the holidays, trying to get some of the deeper meaning and trying to understand how to implement the traditions. So historically, the days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are very unique. They each have their backstory that comes before the actual holiday the way we have it today. In brief, Rosh Hashanah is the day that man was created. We reference this in the prayers. The 6th day of creation, the day that Adam and Eve, the first humans, were created, is the date of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is annually on the anniversary of that day. It's the collective birthday of the human race. Yom Kippur is also a special day. That's the day when, after the Jews had sinned in the desert with the golden calf, and God almost wiped them out, and Moses prayed for them and begged God for forgiveness. After all the steps of the story, on the 40th day of Moshe's visit up on the mountain, which turned out to be the 10th of the year month of Tishrei, the day of Yom Kippur, that's the day when God said, Salachti kitvarecha, I have forgiven the people as you have requested, as you have stated. And that we reference in the Yom Kippur prayers too. And that actually establishes from then on the date of Yom Kippur as a day for forgiveness, a day for atonement, a day to improve and get closer to our true source, get closer to God. But there's so much more at play here than the history of the day or than the atonement for our sins, and then even more than the general things we usually talk about these 2 days. So let's start with Rosh Hashanah and understand what is here, the bigger picture. And we'll understand that by discussing the actual name Rosh Hashanah. What does Rosh Hashanah mean? Does anyone want to suggest? What is the words, the title, the name, Rosh Hashanah, what does it actually mean? Anyone? So Rosh Hashanah, interestingly, does not mean the new year in its most literal sense, although of course it refers to the Jewish New Year, which will be this year on September 19th and 20th. That is the date of the Jewish New Year, but the words Rosh Hashanah actually mean head of the year. Rosh is Hebrew for head, and Hashanah, the year. Rosh Hashanah means the head of the year. Now, what does that mean? How can a year have a head? Of course, we understand that the term the head of the year is a reference to this being the new year. But why that choice of wording? What's implied by this date being the head of the year? So what it actually means is that we're comparing the function of Rosh Hashanah in the year to the function of the head, of the brain, in the human body. Everything in our lives operates from the brain. Our intellect, our awareness, our understanding, our knowledge, our emotion, our consciousness, our cognition, our sensation, our movement, pretty much all the functions of the human body and the human life start in the brain. And it's really from there that they move, that they go forward to everything that's going on in the body. And that's only from an observable perspective. From a scientific perspective, we can see and measure and understand what happens in the brain, and from there, the nervous system and the entire human body. But actually, from a mystical perspective, the very life of the human is within the brain. Because according to Kabbalah, according to Jewish mysticism, people are alive, much as animals are, by virtue of the soul. And that soul, which energizes, animates, and gives life to the human body, is housed in the brain. It comes into the body from a spiritual source in the intellect, in the brain, and from there, it spreads forth to the rest of the body. So it's this way mystically, it's this way in the perspective of Kabbalah, and of course, it's this way medically and scientifically, that really the brain is literally the nerve center for everything that's going on. And this is why the smallest change or the smallest defect, God forbid, in a brain can have such devastating effects on the entire life of the human being. Now, what does this have anything to do with Rosh Hashanah and the new Jewish New Year? Because that's exactly the position, that's exactly the role of Rosh Hashanah in the year. And what that means, and to understand this, we should discuss that in Hasidism and in the mystical tradition, in the Kabbalah, we understand that God didn't just create the world one time, almost 5,781 years ago, and then go to early retirement, go play golf. God didn't just create the world then and move on. Creation is actually ongoing. At every moment, the world, the universe that God created then is being recreated. In other words, re-energized and being maintained as being here by actually being created anew, and otherwise it would not be here. Now, in other words, when God created this world, the world actually remains dependent on the godly energy that creates it out of nothing and keeps it here. Were that energy to no longer be there and no longer be sustaining it, there would actually be nothing to keep the world going. Let's look at a little clip that illustrates this just a little bit.
The amazing thing is how quickly it happened. Within minutes, hundreds of millions of light bulbs, air conditioners, microwave ovens, computers, refrigerators, phone systems, traffic lights, credit card processors, subway cars, and blow dryers died, ceased, stopped, just like that.
There has been a massive power outage throughout much of the Northeast. Millions and millions of people were caught by surprise when the electrical grid suddenly crashed.
Actually, it didn't take any time at all to happen, because nothing happened. Rather, it stopped happening. Imagine that life itself ran on electricity. The engine of our heart, the memory of our brain, the force fields pulling together billions of cells, atoms, and quarks into a body, the surges of will and desire that form the core of our self, we're all wired to one huge power station. Imagine that we lived with the awareness that, in every instant of time, we were utterly dependent upon this outside power source, that our existence and life were not inherited qualities that we somehow possess, but are acted upon us by that external energy force, and that the moment that source should cease to act, we, our world, would simply cease. Indeed, this is the reality of the world we live in. Every nanosecond of time, God looks upon our world, contemplates all the good and evil, triumphs and failings, imperfections and strivings within it. He makes a conscious decision to grant it existence and life. It's as if you could ask the Creator 1 billion times a second, seeing the world you created, would you do it all over again? And God says, "Yes, I would. Exactly as it is."
So that's really just a very minimal description and illustration to understand that the world we live in is dependent on that energy. Because God created our world ex nihilo out of nothing, were the energy that creates it to no longer be there, there would be nothing there. It's unnatural for a universe to be here. Originally, nothing was here. When God bends that natural condition, changes that by introducing a universe, you got to keep maintaining it. Otherwise, it just reverts back to the way it was before. So the Kabbalah and the understanding of that and actually the logic behind it is for another time. But what's important for us to discuss right now and to understand is that that energy, that divine life that sustains our world each and every moment, actually comes in bunches. Almost like, if you use the analogy of that video, almost like an electric power station or transformer that's bringing in high voltage from the source and from the original source of the power to a neighborhood or an area or whatever it is. God also gives the energy to this world in large units of that sort. And actually, on Rosh Hashanah, there's an annual deposit of that energy, of that life force for the entire year. And then each day, each hour, and each second, the energy comes from there for all of our universe and for each and every one of us individually throughout the year. So Rosh Hashanah really is the head of the year in that sense. This is where it starts, at the head. From there, the entire body is energized and managed and run. From Rosh Hashanah, the entire year gets its life force and gets its very being. So on Rosh Hashanah, God is making that decision, kind of like we saw in that clip, making that conscious decision that, yes, I want to refill that power for another year. I want to keep this world going the way it is and maintain it and energize it further, and the people continue to doing what they should to do what they should be doing. And hopefully, we hope and pray each Rosh Hashanah that God does that in a blessed and good and wonderful way for a better year and a happier and a healthier and sweeter year than the year we're coming from. And really, everything we do on Rosh Hashanah centers around that. Centers around this understanding that this is the head of the year. This is when the energy comes in. And hopefully, this is where the blessing comes in for all of the year. And that's why the small things matter so much. You're probably familiar with how on Rosh Hashanah, we dip the apple in the honey, symbolizing the sweet new year. I mean, what does it really matter to do some very small symbol for a new year? But be just like the brain is the head, the core point of the whole body, every little bit matters. Those little symbols of Rosh Hashanah actually imply something greater for the broader picture of the year. So everything we do on Rosh Hashanah is about this, but especially the shofar, especially that great and critical mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah, which is the blowing of the shofar, hearing those sounds. This year we'll do it only on the second day, on Sunday, which will be the 20th, because on Shabbat, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we do not blow the shofar. But that is actually the critical moment of Rosh Hashanah. Why is that? How is that so? Well, because Rosh Hashanah has a lot to do with improving, with us being better people, with the atonement and forgiveness that we talk about, because we're trying to be in a position of worthiness for God to choose us all over again. We're trying to be those better people, those good people that God should say, yes, I want to give these people the life and the blessing for the new year and that new deposit of energy. In fact, we're trying to get to a position where we're comfortable enough to even request that blessing, where we feel we've done what we can to be better people, and we are hoping and praying for that better year and better blessing from God. Sometimes, though, we have a lot to fix. Sometimes we haven't been so good, made mistakes in the past year or prior to that. Maybe there's a lot to clean up. Maybe we're not in such good shape. How do we address that? Shofar is actually the solution to that. And this is something the Baal Shem Tov illustrated with a parable, with an analogy of a prince sent on a special mission by his father, the king. We'll watch that in this very brief clip, and then we'll try to discuss it. So, like I said, that was a very brief presentation of what is really a beautiful parable. How the king wants his son to grow up knowledgeable and experienced and show his commitment and dedication, his goodness outside of the protected environment of the palace. Well, he sends him off to a faraway land, the land of many challenges, and the boy doesn't do so well. He forgets his noble background. He forgets his purpose. He forgets about being that greater person, and instead follows the bad environment that he falls into their ways, and becomes totally engrossed in that, to the point where he even forgets the language of home. Years go by, he doesn't even remember how they speak at the palace. Doesn't even speak that language anymore. Finally, at some point, he has the resolve, he's going to go home, which would also mean he's going to reconnect and he's going to improve. And he trudges back all the way to the capital city, but when he finally shows up at the palace, nobody recognizes him, and the security doesn't even want to let him in. Who is this foreigner who doesn't even speak the language, doesn't look like he belongs in this palace, doesn't even look like an upstanding human being? The desperate boy who had traveled so far and put so much into this against all the odds just starts to cry and scream out. And his father, hearing that sound of his voice, recognizes him and rushes out to embrace him. So he may have forgotten the language, he may have forgotten the approach, he may have forgotten who he should be, but the very voice of his very soul was still there, and that was recognized. And that's the shofar. Because sometimes in life, we get overwhelmed, we get lost in the ways of this world, we forget our divine connection, we forget our divine goodness, and we come to Rosh Hashanah, we try to connect, we try to improve, we try to tap into that new energy of a new year, but we just don't know how. We're just not even in that mindset, not even in that environment, not even in that language. So all we can do is blow the shofar, that call, that simple sound with no words, with no details, straight from the heart. And God hears that, and like the Father, embraces us, brings us in. Maybe this is also why the shofar is so connected to the coming of Mashiach. We know that when Mashiach will come, the shofar will be sounded. That will announce the coming of Mashiach. Maybe this has something to do with how deep the shofar is inside of our hearts. In any case, in bottom line, we understand that Rosh Hashanah is a day of renewal, a day when God renews his connection to our universe, and therefore also his connection with us as individuals, and a day when we renew our commitment to God, our commitment to being better people, our commitment to being better Jews, and we try to start with a fresh slate, notwithstanding the mistakes of our past, start new, start fresh, start good, and start positive. That happens and that's expressed in all the customs of the day, but especially in the blowing of the shofar. And that's why it's so important to hear those sounds. And this year, with the pandemic and all, it becomes challenging. So I do want to stress that we will be having the shofar blowing outside in multiple times and locations on Rosh Hashanah. So in addition to the service indoors all Rosh Hashanah morning, which will be conducted carefully with social distancing, we'll actually do it outdoors as well to give a broader range of people, even those who may not feel comfortable to actually come inside for all that time. All the rest of us will be able to hear the shofar outdoors, keeping a distance, and just briefly hearing the shofar, fulfilling that mitzvah, and moving on with the rest of the holiday. So I will be sharing as we get closer to the details, times and places when we can do that, but that really is the most important part of Rosh Hashanah. Other than that, just to recap, there are the other customs of the day, which are the unique prayers. And of course, if you will be at home and not at the synagogue, please let me know so I can send you a booklet with some of the prayers of the day. At the first evening of Rosh Hashanah, when many people celebrate with a New Year dinner, that would be Friday night, the 18th of September this year, that at that evening, we dip the apple in the honey, saying that prayer for sweet New Year. We also traditionally eat pomegranates, which are a sign of the many seeds, being like the many mitzvahs that we try to do. Other symbolic foods like a round challah, which is that round infinite energy of the year, as well as a sweeter challah for the sweet New Year. In addition to those symbolic foods of that dinner and the prayers of the day and the shofar that we already mentioned, there's also the tashlich prayer, which is done at the water side near any body of water, symbolizing the fish and that energy and that blessing that they represent. We read a special prayer for the new year. This is not done on Shabbat, so it will be done this year on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, Sunday the 20th. And again, we'll be doing that together. That will be outdoors. It's outdoors every year, so that's easier. And those of you who will be staying home or wish to do it in private, just let me know so I can give you a booklet that would include that prayer as well. And of course, Thursday, we will be continuing, this Thursday that is, we will be continuing with our Discover the Future course about the coming of Mashiach. We'll do that outside here at the synagogue, as well as on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube as usual. We will also continue this series of the higher holidays next Monday, talking more about Yom Kippur and moving through those special holidays that are coming up so soon. In the meantime, everybody have a wonderful week. I'm going to end the live stream and take